I think you guys mostly know him, so let's give him a nice round of applause. Scott Mantz. Scott. As you can tell, he's a little bit more animated than I am. He's like a human cartoon character.
I'm like a triple shot of espresso, which I see you have here, Gary.
I needed this to keep up with you.
Who needs Star Trek when you can have Starbucks?
We need Star Trek anyway, but please sit down. I will ask the questions.
First of all, I got to tell you, my time of creation goes way back, way before my first day on October 26, 1991. My very first convention in Philadelphia, where I was born and raised, was on November 21st, 1979. I was 11 years old, and the very first convention, which was a creation convention, it was a sci-fi, fantasy, and horror convention with special guests, David Prowse, who just 2 years before had made his debut as Darth Vader, Stan Lee, who, just created Spider-Man, the Hulk.
Co-created,
that's right, and Fantastic Four, and you name it. And Walter Koenig from Star Trek, the original series, and the feature.
I think we know.
But the first movie had not opened yet. And I just was so thrilled. I shook Walter Koenig's hand, and I said, I'm never going to wash this hand again.
And he never has.
And I still have not. So beware when you see me out in the floor. Just be like, hey, how you doing? But to say that Star Trek changed my life is not an understatement by any means. It's because of Star Trek that I moved to California in 1991. It's because of Star Trek that I changed careers to become a film critic for Access Hollywood. And it's because of Star Trek that I met my wife. And we've been married for 7 years. And funny story, on our very first date, she says, how did you move to California? And I said, I went out to LA to work for an entertainment marketing company.
You left out Star Trek.
So she goes, well, what do they market? And I said, well, sci-fi, horror, TV shows, and movies. She goes, what kind? I said, all right, I'm a massive Star Trek fan, and they run Star Trek conventions. And she goes, this is our first date, okay? So she goes, do you wear the uniform? And I said, only on Halloween. So she goes, okay, I'm down with that. So, thank God she was down with that. So when we got married, I told the story to the New York Times. So when the wedding announcement got posted in the New York Times, half the article was about that conversation. So she goes, of course it's about Star Trek.
Well, I forgot to mention, how many of you guys know who Mary Lou Henner is from Taxi? She has that incredible memory where she can know what happened any day of her life if you give her the date, like what she had for breakfast. That's like Scott. He can remember any date. So you know the dates of every Star Trek episode and when you met everybody. Yeah. So when you were at the first convention, I remember you were on the trivia contest, but then when we hired you, you went out and started hosting the conventions.
That's right.
And I recall one of your biggest ventures as a host was when I think it was Toronto, where you have two idols in life. One is Paul McCartney. So let's just take one brief second, because I know you all love the Beatles. When you met Paul McCartney, didn't he say to you, you're one of those? Because what were you doing?
Yeah, so at the Critics' Choice Awards in 2010, I had only been married for 2 months, but my first dance at my wedding was My Love from Paul McCartney and Wings. And if there's to know me, is to know that I love Star Trek and the Beatles equally. Do not ask me to pick a favorite. It is literally Sophie's choice. So I had been, our first dance was My Love. So at the Critics' Choice Awards in January of 2010, Paul McCartney was there because he was nominated for a song called I Want to Go Home from a movie called Everybody's Fine, which nobody saw. I saw it because I review movies. So we sat down. By the way, we sat down at the Star Trek table with J.J. Abrams and Chris Pine and Zach Quinto and Anton Yelchin. And I looked across the room, and there's Paul McCartney. And during the first commercial break, I grabbed my wife's arm, ran across the room. It was like, a cartoon where you see the wife like flying, her feet they're in the air. So I went over to Paul. He sees me coming. I'm wearing a tuxedo, so obviously I belong there. And he got up, and I said, "Hi, I'm Scott." And he goes, "Hello, Scott." And I said, "This is my wife. We just got married. Our first song was My Love." So he gave us both a hug. Paul McCartney is hugging me and my wife. So I showed him my Beatles watch, which is right here. So he looks at the watch, and he looks at my wife, and it occurred to him that I was a Beatle maniac. So he looks at my wife, and he says, "So how you holding up with this?" But he was very, very nice. They say do not meet your idols, but I met Paul McCartney 4 times, and he was super, super nice all 4 of those times. But then there is William Shatner.
How aren't I supposed to ask the questions? You're so good at this. William Shatner is his other idol, as I mentioned, and you went out to host. I think I might have been there, but I think it was like a test thing, and you were going to host for the first time, and you were supposed to handle Mr. Shatner.
Okay, so this was
So tell us what happened.
April of 1993.
Marilyn Hanner.
Okay, I went out to Toronto with Gary. It was just the 2 of us. And the local fan club on site, which always helps. I mean, we could not do these conventions without the fan clubs. They are the unsung heroes of the convention scene. So let's give it up for the fan clubs.
Hey, we don't sing about them. We sing about them.
Well, you did back then. But I seriously was super, super nervous about meeting Shatner.
I can imagine why.
Because the whole reason, you have to understand, the whole reason I became a Star Trek fan in the first place was because when I was a little kid, the first episode that I ever saw was Mirror, Mirror. And obviously, it's a great episode, but it's an atypical episode because most of it takes place in the alternate universe. But because Star Trek was on every night, and this is in the early 70s, that's, as we all know from the phenomenon, that's where Star Trek really found its audience, and I was one of them. And they were showing the series in production order. So it was the beginning of the 2nd season when Star Trek really hit its stride with episodes like A Mock Time, Doomsday Machine, I, Mud, Trouble with Tribbles, Who Mourns for Outer Knives, The Changeling, and my personal favorite episode, Metamorphosis, which made yesterday's panel with Eleanor Donahue just a career highlight for me. But I became a fan because of Kirk, because of Shatner's performance as Kirk. And say what you want about his acting style. But the fact is, if you watch the original series, especially the first 2 seasons of that show, Shatner's performance was right on point. Look at his performance.
Well, it would have to be for it to have stood this test of time.
It does stand the test of time because his delivery, because he is a Shakespearean trained actor, his delivery was committed. It was filled with conviction. It was devoted. It was passionate. And it is because of that it inspired me, and I would follow Kirk into an active volcano. I wanted to be Captain Kirk. I would quote lines from episodes to try and impress women. Thank God they did not know I was quoting Star Trek. But seriously, it is the reason I became a fan, and it's the reason I still, in my own sort of weird way, want to be Captain Kirk. And so this was April in 1993, and so I go out backstage to meet his limo, and he gets out. He's wearing a sharp suit. Star Trek Memories, his first autobiography about the making of the original series, had just come out, and I thought it was a great book, and I was so nervous.
I sent him out alone too.
Sent me out alone. So then I introduced him on stage. I mean, he was nice.
Don't leave out the part about. Do you remember the part about the mayor?
Oh, the mayor, yes. Well, the mayor of Toronto did a proclamation because
It was
Shatner-
supposed to be William Shatner Day in Toronto. So, do you remember what happened?
Tell me.
You don't remember? How can
Well-
you not remember?
Well, what I remember, what you remember, might be two different things. So, what do you remember?
Okay, I remember this. So we were told the mayor of Toronto was going to be there and was going to come up and present Mr. Shatner with this beautiful award and a street sign. I think that said William Shatner Boulevard on it.
Yes.
So Scott is hosting, and he says, Mr. Shatner, we have a very special presentation. We have the actual mayor of Toronto here to present you with a proclamation and a nice surprise. And you did that, and we're all sitting in the audience waiting, and nobody showed up. And Bill was not happy.
Well. So what I remember to further that story was when I went to take him back outside to get in his limo. It wasn't there yet, and he was on a flight to another location for
Another convention, probably.
Yeah, he did like 4 cities in 2 days. It was incredible. So he says to me, "Where's my car?" I said, "I don't know."
That was a mistake.
So he goes, and you can picture this. He goes, "Well, you better get your act together. I need to know." So I was kirked. I was like, "Don't worry. I see your car coming right now." So he gets in his limo and he's off. And as I went back inside, I started sweating and I got very nervous. And I was like, "Captain Kirk just yelled at me." But over the years,
Yeah, I was just going to add that.
since then, he has been absolutely nothing but nice to me. He has gotten to know me by name. When I saw him just a couple weeks ago in San Diego at Comic-Con, he remembered exactly. He's like, "There he is. There's my friend." And, that was really, really special. I've interviewed him a bunch of times over the years for Access Hollywood. And, in the later years when I did host conventions and he was a guest, he was always a professional. I remember when I interviewed with you and Adam Malin at Creation for the job in 1991. I specifically asked you, Gary, I said, over the years, and this is in 1991, who has been your best guest, your favorite guest? And you said William Shatner, because he always shows up on time. He doesn't have an entourage. He is an absolute professional, and he is great with the fans.
True. And I still feel that way today. I can add some other equally great talent from other shows as well, but Bill is the biggest star of all that we work with, and just super professional.
Super professional.
Yeah, and for someone who knows Julia Roberts on a first name basis and George Clooney. By the way, how is Julia Roberts?
Well, I just saw Julia Roberts back in May at the Cannes Film Festival. I was interviewing her with George Clooney for the movie Money Monster, which I thought was very good. It came out a couple weeks after Captain America: Civil War, so it just got lost, unfortunately. But it was directed by Jodie Foster. When it comes out on like streaming, iTunes, Amazon, Netflix, all that stuff, or Blu-ray, it's a very, very good film. But it's like over the years, as I've gotten to interview some pretty prominent Hollywood actors and actresses like Julia Roberts, Tom Cruise I interviewed last year for Mission Impossible 5. Could not have been nicer. I've been very lucky that a lot of these actors and actresses have been very, very cool to me, and have not shattered my illusion of who these people are, except maybe Harrison Ford. He's a tough cookie.
Was that because it was just yes, no answers? Or?
No, Harrison Ford is obviously an icon. I mean, I grew up loving Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Rick Deckard, Witness, The Fugitive, Air Force One, Get Off My Plane. And, he's a very low-maintenance kind of guy. So I expected one person, I got someone else, and I was a little thrown by that. But in the end, he was nice. He just wasn't, didn't have the energy, but I guess not everyone is going to have that kind of energy. But, I got to tell you, to do interviews with J.J. Abrams for these last 3 Star Trek films.
Which is why we're mainly here now.
Which is why we are here. By round of applause, I want to know how many of you, by round of applause only, how many of you have really loved these last 3 Star Trek feature films. When I saw Star Trek 2009 at an advanced screening on the Paramount lot on April 21st, 2009, I was one of 5 people in that room, in that theater. And they invited me because they know that I am a massive fan, but also because I am a film critic. So they wanted to know on both levels how I felt about the film.
The studio was actually asking you these questions?
JJ, through the studio, invited me to that screening. So that in itself is really, really cool. So I remember that point in Star Trek 2009 when they're on the bridge and Spock makes the comment, Spock in the Kelvin timeline, Zachary Quinto, he says, "This ship from the future has altered our destinies. The futures that we were going to have been altered." And I went, wait a minute. So the Guardian of Forever, the Tribbles, the Planet Killer, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, none of that happened? And I went, okay. Okay, I see where you're going with this. This is an alternate universe. We still have the Prime Universe. We still have the Blu-rays. We have Netflix. Thank goodness for Netflix, man, I'm telling you. But what they've effectively and brilliantly done with 2009 was they freed themselves of the canon, of the baggage that came along with then 43 years of Star Trek history, so they could do whatever they want now with these movies. And I thought that was a brilliant stroke to do that. But then Star Trek Into Darkness happened. Now, by round of applause.
Why do you keep standing up?
Because it's a dramatic moment.
Okay, go for it.
By round of applause, how many of you loved Star Trek Into Darkness? More than I expected.
Sitting down again.
As an action fan, as a movie fan, I feel like in my interviews and my interaction with movie lovers have loved Star Trek Into Darkness more than actual fans. And I definitely remember when it got to that point in Into Darkness, when it sort of became this flipped over version of Wrath of Khan. And then when Spock yelled Khan, I went like this. I was kind of embarrassed. First of all, the Wrath of Khan is the Citizen Kane of Star Trek movies.
We agree on something.
You just don't touch it. You don't remake Citizen Kane. You don't remake The Empire Strikes Back, although they did remake A New Hope when it was called The Force Awakens. But I digress. I still enjoyed The Force Awakens. But I feel like Into Darkness got attacked in a lot of ways, and I understand the criticism, but I still love the movie. Now, that brings us to the third movie. I'm getting
standing up again.
By a round of applause, how many of you loved Star Trek Beyond? Yeah. I love Star Trek Beyond.
Yes.
How many of you felt like that was a throwback to the original series?
Yes.
For those of you who have not seen it, I don't want to spoil it, but when you get to the point where you find out who the villain, Krall, really is, that to me felt like a throwback to the original series. It felt like the Omega Glory. It felt like bread and circuses. And it felt like the Doomsday Machine, where you have, you know, moments with other starship captains that kind of go off the grid. And I felt like it was a great standalone film. It was also the perfect movie to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. When I was gearing up to see the first film in 2009, or the 11th film, depending on how you look at it, you know, when Next Generation premiered in 1987, I didn't really like it at first. The first 2 seasons were not very good, but then Michael Piller came in, and the show really hit its stride, and Star Trek The Next Generation became a very, very close second to the original series as my favorite show of the 5. But with each passing show, I felt like if I like it or I don't like it, I still have the original series, I still have The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine, and I will always have these other shows if I don't like what's next. But with Star Trek 2009, my feeling was, now you're messing with my boys. And the success of that film, the way it introduced Star Trek to people who had never seen Star Trek before.
Right. That's true.
I mean, my mom loved that movie, and she is not a Star Trek fan. When I went to my 25-year high school reunion in Philadelphia, this big guy named Todd Capriotti. Are you here, Todd? No. Good. He picked on me a lot because I was a Trekkie. And he puts his arm around me. By the way, when I went to my reunion, I felt kind of like a rock star because I'd already
been on TV.
Got on TV with access and everything. So he puts his arm around me and says, Scott, I know I used to pick on you for being a Trekkie and everything, but that last movie was great. And I went, welcome aboard, Captain. And I had to put my arms. He's still a big guy. But I just felt like I really did feel the tone of the film was so fresh and vibrant, and it was exhilarating. It reinvigorated Star Trek after it really did need it, and that you had people who were now going back and trying out the original show or Next Generation because they fell in love with that movie. And by the time the third movie came around, Star Trek Beyond, I felt like, boy, they're really gelling. They have this great chemistry. There was a lot of heart, a lot of humor with Star Trek Beyond. And, J.J. Abrams told me just 2 weeks ago when I interviewed him for Star Trek Beyond that the next Star Trek film is going to bring together James T. Kirk and his father, George Kirk, played by Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah. Scott has developed a really unique relationship with the stars of the new film, and we do have some footage that we're going to show you in just a moment. But before I want to get to that, I want to say that all the proteges I've kind of had at Creation over the years, and we've had people who've gone on to create their own TV shows and done some beautiful artwork and created their own companies. The person I'm most proudest of is Scott.
Aww. I have to tell you, in all honesty, and I mean this, over the years, because I had worked for Creation for about 10 years, and I, remember the first convention I ever really hosted, the Shatner Toronto doesn't really count because we traded. It was in Cincinnati, and Brent Spiner was the guest, and it was in 1993, and we had audio problems, so I had to hold the microphone up to a TV so people in the audience could hear it. But I learned so much on how to speak on stage and how to engage, people and an audience, that when it came time for me to do interviews for Access Hollywood, I felt like I learned so much from Adam and Gary on stage that it was almost easy. And in the years since, when I started doing Q&As with filmmakers after screenings in Toronto and at Sundance and at Comic-Con and just during award season, I really feel like everything I learned from my time with Creation. So to be here on the 50th anniversary of Star Trek and the 25th anniversary of my first year with Creation is an honor and a privilege, and I am very proud.
Yeah, well, we're proud to have you.
Nice to have
Scott
you.
Mantz, everybody.
Thank
Great job, Scott.
so very, very much. Let's hear it for Creation. Let's hear it for Star Trek 50. Let's hear it for Star Trek Beyond. Stay tuned. We got a great show planned throughout the weekend. Coming up, a very, very special guest. Thank you so much.